As Rich said, I'm Peggy, and I'm going to be talking to you about mobile dev trends and Confluence Mobile. So just a tiny bit more about myself. I started at Atlassian about 3.5 years ago, and most recently have been working on Workbox, so notifications and tasks that Shiap has talked to you about. So I think the reason that I started in computing and programming is because I've always had an interest in computers. So I don't quite remember when we first got our computer, but I do know I was always wanting to just find an excuse to get on it, even if it was to just type in DOS commands. But I think what really excited me was when I discovered HTML and CSS, and I realized that I could host my own web page on GeoCities, and the entire world could see it. Now, of course, probably only my friends ever saw it, but I still thought it was really cool. This was probably 12 years ago, and in the past decade, the web has obviously evolved in leaps and bounds, and we no longer have static web pages with blink and marquee tags. Instead, now we have shiny, new, Ajax-powered, awesome web apps that can do amazing things that we probably thought were impossible 5 years ago. Now, the web isn't the only thing that has moved in the past decade. Mobile phones have also evolved greatly. So we don't have old, large bricks anymore. We've got very portable phones. But I think the turning point in the mobile industry was in 2007 when Apple released the iPhone. This was when smartphones became really popular and mainstream. I think it's safe to say that most of us here probably own a smartphone of some description. And the thing is, with smartphones, because they're so popular, so portable, it means that we have them with us all the time, and we're spending more and more time on them. So we're checking our emails, browsing the internet, online banking, checking Facebook, you name it, we're probably doing it on our smartphones. Now the thing is, what does it mean for us as developers, given that people are spending more and more time on their phones? I think it means that we really need to think about how our desktop applications will look like on a mobile. Chances are it's going to look crap, because a mobile has only a fraction of the screen real estate as your 13-inch MacBook Pro or your 24-inch desktop monitor. So this means we need to think about the approaches that we can take to make your desktop application or desktop web page mobile-friendly. In general, at the moment, there's sort of 3 accepted approaches, and that's to go native, use the web tools, or use some sort of cross-platform toolkit. So the first step is to go native. So this means that you're writing a dedicated application for each of the platforms you want to support. So if you want to support iPhone, Android, and Windows Mobile, you need to write an Objective-C, Java, and a C# application. The awesome thing about going native is that you can use the native UI controls, and you can access the phone's hardware and sensors and everything that the phone provides. So this means you can make really slick-looking mobile applications and very feature-rich. The downside to going native, though, is you really need to cater for the user experiences of each mobile platform. So this means you really need to make sure that you conform to the user experience paradigms for Android, for iPhone, and for Windows Mobile. Now, unfortunately, they're all slightly different, which means you need to make sure that each one is correct. So this means you can't translate your user experience across the different platforms. So not only are you handling 3 different code bases in different languages, you're going to have to manage them because they're going to be quite different because of the user experience workflows you're going to have to work through. So this can be quite costly. So there is another approach, and that is to use the web. So if you go with the web, you're using tools such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to create your own web app that your users can load up in their browser and access. Now, chances are most smartphones have a web browser of sorts, so you're targeting multiple platforms at once. Of course, the downside is that you don't get the native experience. You're using only web tools, you don't have the native UI components. But that doesn't mean that you can't make an awesome mobile experience. And finally, there's cross-platform toolkits. So cross-platform toolkits claim that they're the holy grail of mobile development. Write once, run everywhere. The problem with this is because you only write once and it attempts to compile to each of the platforms that you want to support, it tends to translate the user experience across the platforms, which actually detracts from the actual app itself. Because your application will look like a native mobile, but it won't behave like one. So you'll confuse and frustrate your users. They'll see a button, they'll think it will behave a certain way, but it just doesn't behave as they expect. So if you've done robotics, this is known as the uncanny valley, where something is sort of just there but not quite, and that's actually worse than something that's completely different. So in my opinion, I think the two choices are really to go native or the web. It really depends on your use case. If your application has a lot of interaction and requires to use some sort of mobile sensor, say the accelerometer, you probably want to go native. But if your web application is predominantly content consumption, then web is probably a good choice because you can target multiple platforms in one hit. So for Confluence Mobile, we decided to go web. So if you haven't seen Confluence Mobile, this is what it looks like. As you can see, it's running in Safari on the iPhone. And you'll notice that it looks quite different to Confluence Desktop. So the dashboard is much more simple now. It's a list of items. You can see your popular, your recent blogs, your network activity. And then when you drill down into a particular page, you can see the title, the author, and of course the contents. So we've really optimized it for the consumption use case. But of course, there are still some actions that you can do on Confluence Mobile. You can like a page or like a comment, and you can even reply to the comment. So if you're on the train and you think, hey, I should really reply to that comment, you can do that. The other use case is to search. So if you're coming back from a meeting and you realize, oh, I just wanted to check those meeting notes, you can search for your meeting notes page, open it up in Confluence Mobile, and read it on the train. You'll also notice that there's notifications and tasks there in the left flyout menu, so yay. So as you can see, that's Workbox on the go, as Shihab has sort of shown you before lunch. So you have all your notification list, and then you can drill down and you can see your notifications in detail. We've also implemented all the inline actions on mobile. So you can like a page or a comment, you can reply in line within Workbox. So you can reply in Workbox or on Confluence Mobile. It's very easy to use. And of course, there are tasks. So you can see your list of tasks while you're on the go. You can mark them as complete, or you can see the tasks that you have completed. You can also create a new task if you want. And when you drill down, you can see all the notes you've added yourself. So it's pretty much the fully fledged Workbox, but on mobile. So now I've given you a very quick overview of Workbox and Confluence Mobile. But what I'd like to tell you is how we got from Workbox Desktop to Workbox Mobile. So to tell you the truth, with Workbox Mobile, we actually sort of left it alone, just sitting there for a long time. In fact, it was a nice-to-have feature for the longest time. It was only towards the end of the roadmap that we realized maybe we do have time for a mobile version. And this actually worked quite well because, as Sharif sort of mentioned, Workbox Desktop pivoted a lot of times. And when we finally got to writing the mobile version, it meant that most of the decisions had settled down and we could just concentrate and write the mobile version. So, quick question, who here has done responsive design? Some people, couple of people. So for those who haven't done responsive design, it's basically using CSS media queries to determine specific styles that should apply for elements given the viewport you have, so given how much screen real estate you have. So if you have a large 24-inch screen real estate, you might want to show all the fancy menu icons, large images, etc. But if, say, your user resized the browser or is viewing it on their mobile, you can use CSS media queries to hide some elements, to change images, make font sizes larger. So for Workbox, we decided to try the responsive design, and we spiked this. Because we thought, well, Workbox on desktop is fairly small. It only takes up that sort of top right-hand corner. It should make sense that we can shift things around, make font sizes larger, get rid of unimportant information, and it should work on mobile. Well, it did work, but not really. It sort of didn't feel quite right. The functionality was there, but it wasn't very friendly. So we decided to completely scrap that responsive spike and start from a blank slate. We decided to completely rewrite our mobile UI. Now, when I say we started from a blank slate, we didn't have to start completely from scratch. We were able to reuse a lot of what we already had on Workbox desktop. So Workbox, we were using Backbone, so our views and our models were fairly well separated, which meant we were able to reuse all our Backbone models and collections, and of course, all our backend, including our REST endpoints. And because our framework didn't change much, we were able to reuse all our testing infrastructure. So Jasmine for our unit tests, and WebDriver for our end-to-end tests. All we did was we added extra mobile-specific use cases to make sure we had coverage. Now, of course, it wasn't all just fun and games and a walk in the park. We were rewriting a dedicated mobile UI for Workbox. So we had to rewrite our Backbone views and our soy templates. But I think the hardest part of porting Workbox from desktop to Confluence Mobile was that we had to make it work with Zepto.js. So Zepto is a mobile-friendly alternative to jQuery, which you're probably more familiar with. So it provides a lot of the functionality that jQuery provides, not all of them, but most of them. And it's mobile-friendly because when minified and gzipped, Zepto is about 8.5 KBs, whereas jQuery is 32 KBs. So when you're on a flaky internet connection, which I'm sure we all know, this can make a huge difference. So I've shown you I guess, what we've learned from Workbox. And the other thing that we did learn, apart from responsive design wasn't the way to go, was that you really needed to test on a real phone. Because if you think about it, when your users use your mobile web app, they'll be using it on their phones, not on their desktops. So you really want to make sure that it feels good and works well on a phone. And the reason that it's so important is because the way we interact with our phones and the way we interact with our desktop is very different. So the first thing I think is fairly obvious. With a desktop or a laptop, you usually have a physical keyboard with a mouse and a trackpad. But with our phones, you've only got your fingers. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I have fat fingers. And when compared to a pinpoint precision of a mouse, my fingers feel even fatter. So when you're designing your buttons and your action areas, make sure that the tap area is large enough and not too close together so that it's easy to use. Apple suggests a minimum of 44 by 44 pixels, but I think it really depends on your specific application and your use case. And secondly, because of the different type of interaction, the response time can be sometimes unexpected. So when we first used Workbox on mobile, it felt unresponsive. It was a bit laggy. Now, the reason for this is when you tap the screen, there's a 300 millisecond delay between the tap and when the click event is fired. Now, as humans, we can actually detect any delays greater than 100 milliseconds. So this 300 millisecond delay was just long enough to let us feel something was wrong. Luckily, there is a way around this, and that is by using the FastClick library. So the FastClick library is a very small bit of JavaScript that eliminates this 300 millisecond delay, but it still handles a case for multi-touch and gestures. And finally, on a similar note, speed. So our mobile phones are really fast and powerful, but chances are they're not as powerful as our desktops. So a bit of JavaScript that runs really smoothly and really well on your desktop could potentially run really sluggishly and slow on your mobile. So you want to make sure that this doesn't happen to your application. And of course, internet. When you're on the train, chances are you don't have a stable Wi-Fi connection. So you really want to make sure when you're developing for a mobile web app to think about the resources you're downloading. You want to keep this to a minimum. So this means you really need to think twice when you're pulling in an external library. Do you really need that library? Will it really add to my user experience? So these are the key things that we've learned when moving Workbox into mobile. And the thing is, Workbox is a Confluence plugin, and we were able to integrate it with Confluence Mobile. So this means that you can actually also integrate your plugins into Confluence Mobile as well. And I'm actually going to show you how you can do it with Team Calendars as an example. So I'm assuming most of you here know of Team Calendars? Yes? Cool? Sharif is nodding his head. So basically, Team Calendars lets you manage your team's calendars, so travel, important team events, etc. And it's a Confluence plugin. So I think the first step, if you want to develop a mobile plugin, is to think about the mobile use case. What will your users want to do when they're on the go? Because you got to remember that it's quite different to what they want to do when they're on the desktop. So for a calendar use case, I think it makes sense that users want to know what they've got upcoming. What are the important events they've got in the next few days? So I'm going to show you how to create an upcoming events mobile plugin into Confluence. So firstly, we want to display our own sort of upcoming menu item into the left navigation bar. So our users will know, hey, I can see my upcoming events on mobile. So now, before I go any further and show any code, the plugin points I'm going to show you aren't confidential and they're not top secret, but they're not yet an officially public API. So this means that these plugin points can change. But if you really are eager in integrating with Confluence Mobile, come talk to me afterwards, because we'd love to hear your feedback to see how you want to integrate with Confluence Mobile. So now that that's over and done with, let's get back to adding that menu item into the left navigation bar. So to do this, we need to define a web panel. As you can see here, this web panel, if you've done plugin dev, should look very familiar. In fact, I think the only mobile-specific line is the location, which specifies where to plug in to the mobile navigation bar. And then in the body of the web panel, we've defined a resource, which is just the velocity macro that contains the HTML of our actual menu item. So the velocity macro looks something like this. It's a list item with a header and then a list of the actual menu items you want to link to. You'll notice here that I've used internationalization. So I actually didn't need to do anything special because Team Calendars already uses internationalization. All I needed to do was add in the key value pairs into the internationalization properties file, and it works. So if your plugin already uses internationalization, you can use this too. And so with those 2 extra bits of code, we've now got our upcoming events in the left navigation bar. Unfortunately though, if you click on that now, nothing happens because we haven't downloaded any of our mobile-specific resources into Confluence Mobile. So to do that, we need to define our web resource. Again, this should look very familiar to plugin devs. I've defined a soy transformer because I'm using soy templates. I've defined the specific resources I want to download, so my JavaScript, CSS templates. And then the mobile-specific stuff would be the dependency and the context. So the dependency is there because we want to make sure that all of Confluence Mobile resources have already downloaded before our plugin downloads. And at the moment, the only way to do this is to define the dependency in the web resource. And then finally, the context. So the context is there so that Confluence knows when I'm displaying in mobile view, go and download these specific resources defined in this particular web resource. So with the web resource defined, when a user now clicks on the show upcoming, they can see the upcoming list of events. So that was actually quite simple. I'm not going to go into the details of how I implemented the Backbone views and soy templates because that's more or less Backbone specific. And the hardest part would probably be designing it in such a way that it's mobile friendly. But what I will do is go through a couple of Confluence Mobile specific tips and gotchas. So the first thing is Confluence Mobile is a single page app. So this means that your resources, in particular your styles and your JavaScript, can affect other plugins resources, including Confluence Mobile itself, and of course, vice versa. So you really want to make sure that you namespace your styles and your JavaScript correctly. And secondly, because it is a single page app, when you link to, say, a Confluence page, you want to make sure that you don't force a full refresh. You want to link it in such a way that Backbone takes care of the routing and routes to the correct page and renders it for you. Which brings me to the next point, and that is that Confluence uses Backbone. So we really want to hook into the Confluence Mobile router for our own plugin. To do this, we need to first stop the Backbone history, grab the Confluence Mobile router, add in our route, and then kick off the history again. So here I've simply added a route that's called upcoming that matches the teamcal/upcoming URL. And then when that URL is hit, it will call the teamcal app show upcoming function. So this function should start up your app and render your view into Confluence Mobile. And to render the view into Confluence Mobile, what you're really interested in is this contents area under the header. So the DOM of this area looks something like this. There's a lot of stuff outside of this, but this is what you're interested in. So you have the inner container, which is an ID, and you've got a header, and then you've got another div of class container. This is where you want to render your plugin. This is where the action happens. So I'm going to reiterate again, and that is that Confluence Mobile uses Zepto instead of jQuery. So although Zepto does provide most of the functionality that jQuery does, there are still some quirks and weird cases and weird edge cases. So you really want to make sure that your plugin compiles and runs correctly with Zepto if you plan on writing a mobile plugin. And the next thing, and not quite the last thing, is that you have to use Confluence 4.3 or greater. Because if you use anything before, you're going to run into troubles because Confluence Mobile didn't exist. So make sure you remember to change your POM files. And Confluence, of course, has a lot of awesome macros. So unfortunately, at the moment, macros look something like this on Confluence 4.3. Now, I'm not sure if you can read that, but that here says View Desktop Version. So that's probably not what you want to see your macros look like on mobile. Luckily, though, you will be able to create mobile-friendly macros very soon. And the process is quite similar. Firstly, think of a mobile use case. What do your users want to do with your macro when they're on the go on their mobile? And chances are it may be slightly different, but you'll likely want to change the way it looks. So you need to provide new styles and new templates. And remember that the JavaScript has to work with Zepto and not jQuery. And finally, you need to tell Confluence, I've provided a mobile-friendly version of my macro. And to do this, you simply add in device type mobile into your module descriptor, and Confluence will know that, hey, this macro has a mobile-friendly version. Now, the next thing is you shouldn't forget about tablets either. So tablets are probably large enough now, and they're very popular too, but chances are your users will want to view Confluence in the desktop version when they're viewing it on a tablet. So with tablets, you can use what I referred to earlier, the CSS media queries or responsive design, to make it tablet-friendly. Get rid of hover effects, make font sizes larger, tap areas larger, because remember, your users will be interacting with their tablets with their fingers as well. So I've talked to you a lot about our experiences porting Workbox from desktop to Confluence Mobile and the fact that responsive design was there but not quite there. And I've shown you how to do it with team calendars, with a quick reminder that the plugin API points are likely to change, but probably won't change by much. And I think the next thing I should talk about is tools. Are there any tools that are good for mobile development? Well, in reality, the best tool is actually your desktop browser. So most modern desktop browsers let you change the user agent such that it's a mobile user agent. This means your desktop browser masquerades as a mobile browser. So when you hit your Confluence server on your desktop, it will actually go and display the mobile version for you. And the awesome thing about this is you can use all the desktop tools that you're used to when developing for the web on your desktop. So here I've got the Web Inspector open in Chrome. I can inspect the elements, tweak the CSS, delete nodes, set breakpoints in JavaScript, check my console logs, everything that I'm used to. But of course, it's still just your desktop browser. You can go one step closer and use a simulator. And if you find a bug in the simulator, you can use this tool called iWeb Inspector that allows you to open a web inspector to inspect your simulator elements. So this works the same as the Web Inspector on Chrome. Now, of course, I've been sort of stressing that you really want to test your plugin or your macro on a physical phone. So how do you do remote debugging? Because I guarantee you, you will find bugs when you test it on the phone. So in order to do remote debugging, there's actually a pretty nifty tool from PhoneGap. So if you go to that URL, you'll see a page with 3 simple instructions. And that is essentially pick a name. So here I've chosen Meeple. And then include that script, so the script from PhoneGap, into your plugin. So that when your plugin loads, it will download those scripts. And then go to the corresponding URL on your desktop browser. So what you'll see on your desktop browser is a web inspector. Now the really cool thing about this is that Web Inspector inspects the elements on your phone. So when you hover over the DOM, you'll see elements on your phone actually highlight. Again, you can change the CSS, delete node elements, etc. The one drawback about this though is it's really, really slow. It's actually really frustrating to use. So ideally, you want to catch as many bugs as possible when you're developing on the browser or on the simulator. But this is sort of the last resort that you'll end up having to use. So I know I haven't explicitly said this, but if you plan on supporting multiple devices and multiple platforms, you really need to test on the physical devices of each platform. So iPhone, Android, Windows Phone, if you want to support them, you need to test on them. Unfortunately, for Android and to some extent Windows Mobile, there is fragmentation. So if you want to support multiple versions of Android, you probably should test on the different versions and maybe even different manufacturers because Android has its own custom OS for each manufacturer. Now, I know some of you here are probably thinking about the Android-iPhone debate, which one's better, which one's worse. And to be honest, I don't think it really matters which one's better or worse because the reality is mobiles and tablets are just getting more and more popular. More and more people are using it, and chances are we're going to be spending more and more time on it. So this means we really need to think about how we're going to make our applications work nicely on mobile. So when you do start developing for your mobile application, remember that the way we interact with our mobile devices is very different to the way we interact with our desktops. And because of this different interaction, the response times may be unexpected. So you want to make sure that you test this out on the physical phone. And finally, speed. Although our mobiles are getting a lot more powerful and much faster, you really want to make sure that it still runs as fast as you think it does, because no one wants to be sitting there waiting while they're in the queue for your mobile app to load. And I guess last but not least, go out and have fun making mobile applications. Thank you.